Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Keela Flores with IABC. Welcome to today's Solution Provider webinar, Communicating in Crisis, 4 Proven Strategies to Communicate in Quarantine. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Feel free to submit written questions anytime by using the Q&A or chat boxes. We will go over as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. We will also be sharing a recording along with the slides following the webinar. Our speaker today is Jason Eder, and our solution provider is Staffbase. Jason heads the U.S. marketing and brand strategy for Staffbase and has served as an expert in operational leadership, marketing, sales, and business development for more than 10 years. He's obsessed with thinking outside of the box and brings his distinctive energy wherever he goes. With a background in theater and film history, he's ventured into the world of podcasting and currently stars in Staffbase YouTube videos. Staffbase is an end-to-end employee communication platform designed to engage the hard-to-reach. The company's employee app and people-first intranet offer more than just a technical solution, but establishes an entirely new category for state-of-the-art employee communication and engagement. Staffbase currently serves hundreds of global businesses ranging from 1,000 to 500,000 and more employees. And now I'd like to turn it over to Jason.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much to the IABC community and the folks that run IABC as well. For all of you listening, I just want to first say that I hope you, your friends, your colleagues, and families are remaining as healthy and safe as possible. Further, I hope there's been opportunities for a little laughter throughout all of this. I just learned this morning that 10 to 15 minutes of laughter can burn you 50 calories. So that is a chocolate kiss, which excites me. So I'll be sure that everybody will get a copy of the recording as mentioned earlier, and any links that I mentioned throughout the session as well. Make sure that everybody gets a copy of them as well. So, okay, on Tuesday afternoon, I had the pleasure of speaking with IABC's international podcast host, Dan Gold. During the conversation, he asked me a question that I thought would help paint a picture for today. He simply said, why is Staffbase doing this webinar? Well, at Staffbase, we saw something pretty remarkable over the past several months. In our usage audit from January to today, our global customer base increased its publication rate of news by an additional 163%. Our readership increased by an additional 74%, and even weekend readership increased an additional 150%. This surprised us so much that we thought to share with you what we have found so far during this crisis. Hopefully, what we have seen will provide some help in getting your information seen when it matters most. So a little bit about Staffbase before we dive into these 4 points. The foundation or core of what we offer is our employee communications platform. Crisis management has actually been a huge part of this. Our platform has been used to inform and alert after a terrorist attack. Our platform provides resorts, a way to alert staff and receive acknowledgements of being safe, being in safe quarters during hurricanes and coastal flooding. We've even seen cattle ranches across the nation warn multiple locations of imminent ice storms. Now, we've taken all the best practices that we've learned and launched Staffbase Now. So our goal with Staffbase Now is to provide a templated, easy to administer solution that gets your team up and running on the same day. That's it. So if you want to learn more about Staffbase Now, there's a link at the end to get started, but let's dive into the points now. The coronavirus, or COVID-19, this outbreak has a massive impact on businesses around the globe. Companies and enterprises are really struggling to keep their operations running productively despite troubling uncertainties. The message has gone from this will not impact us to this has impacted us. Corona is here, it's big, and it's showing no signs of slowing down or going anywhere. However, before we knew about Corona, the world was, I think on its best day, a bit fragile. The World Health Organization had already stated that health, finance, and politics were dominating catalysts for our growing anxieties. In fact, the United States was reported to be 20% more stressed than the global standard. My point here is communication and information sharing has to treat this fragility with respect, consideration, and focus. So here we are. Public figures aren't shaking hands. Schools are shut down. Baby wipes, toilet paper, and paper towels are absent on store shelves. Public transit is being washed in hazmat suits. All major sporting events have been at least postponed. And Tom Hanks is in quarantine. Our world is a different place right now. Here's the catch. Now is your time. This is why it is of the utmost importance and that for transparency and clear crisis communications. If you, like many, have been looking for a seat at the table, that day has arrived. Now is the time for communication. If you're in comms, this is your day. This is your moment. Communication is at the heart of the employee experience, and your input has more magnitude than ever before. So stand up, share your incredible knowledge, be the voice that so many are seeking. So today, we're going to talk about these 4 strategies that we've been uncovering throughout the past couple of months and through our experiences with other crisis-related management situations. We're going to talk about why your message matters. Then we're going to talk about the challenge between whether your organization is or is not capable of having a work from home policy and what that means. We're going to talk about providing a single source of truth. And then lastly, building a fundamental channel in order to do this successfully. So let's move on. I just got a request to turn my volume up. I'm just going to see if this helps. There you are. Hopefully that'll help Tara. All right, great. So sound is great. Thank you. Oh, perfect. Okay, just want to make sure. All right. So your message matters. Let's dive right into this. More than ever, in a time of crisis, your message does matter. Now that your boardroom C-levels are listening, I caution you to be extremely reserved in how you respond to this crisis. And let me provide you some examples. See, I work in New York City. Just last week, less than 10 days ago, all New York City officials delivered a message of caution to stay clear of groups and maintain a 6 foot safe distance from neighbors. They suggested they weren't taking any drastic measures yet, but they acknowledged that this is a serious issue. So what you see here are the headlines that followed. In a time of crisis, clear and actionable messaging is imperative. All of these headlines suggest quite differently, right? Everything here is saying, giving you a different message, which plays into this confusion and plays into this mass hysteria. The one question everyone wanted wasn't being answered. What should I do? The answer at the time was quite ambiguous. Was I to stay home? Do the shops remain open? 6 feet distance? Do I avoid mass transit? If you're suggesting I should think about avoiding mass transit, are you telling me I should avoid mass transit? How serious was this caution? Now look at your organization. The questions being asked aren't about the virus. They want to know where the company stands and what they, as a staff, are expected to do. The most successful organizations that we've seen have provided a clear action plan on what their staff should do. Be clear and provide context. And also, it's okay if you don't have all the answers, because you don't. Nobody does. But what you must do is be clear on what your people need to do now while providing maximum transparency. So just to recap here, be transparent. Things kind of suck right now. Some real talk actually might earn you some trust. You don't need to sugarcoat everything. Provide context. If you've made a decision to close, tell us why and what will happen next. Provide examples. Help people know that your leaders are thinking of everything they're thinking of too. Acknowledge what you don't know. Similar to being transparent, it's completely reasonable to call yourself out. We're all learning, but provide clear, actionable, and tangible next steps. This is one of those few times that top-down communications actually is a little bit desired. Lastly, it's time to drop any formalities. So spelling mistakes, grammar, low quality video, these are the least of your concerns right now. Just get the message out with clear actions and do so as quickly and as often as possible. So this is an example, Max Mara. They're actually, unfortunately, headquartered in Italy. So they have been in front of this for quite some time. A silver lining throughout the crisis, though, is how quickly they shared emergency information with its hundreds of store managers and remote employees around the world. they have been providing consistent and clear messaging to their team. They remained ahead of the curve by creating a dedicated channel in its global newsfeed of their employee solution, curating public information from the most relevant and trusted sources. So let's jump into this next topic, as I'm sure you've personally experienced. And if you can see my video, if you're not on the phone and you're watching the video, I'm in my home office. Yesterday, I was talking to IABC and my dog was chewing on a bone. My kids are running around upstairs. I'm certain that that is a very familiar feeling for all of you right now. And I empathize. The amount of discussion I had to have with my wife this morning to make sure everybody was as quiet as possible was a serious discussion. But what has also been clear, and to the first point, a lack of clarity and action by our corporate government leaders has fueled some pretty serious outrage and hysteria here, right? So without talking about what those action plans are, this is where you get these types of comments. People get frustrated really quickly, especially when they're in panic mode. So let's talk about what we can do here. So most organizations are in one of two categories. Either they can or cannot implement a work from home policy. For those that can, you'll need to clearly outline and share expectations of this new work environment. So you need to consider what equipment can and cannot be used, share that information, make it easier through forms, etc. Share what financial investments would be required to accommodate that. You should also consider working with individual managers to identify any of your staff that require additional assistance, maybe provide some sort of messaging around them in case someone is a little embarrassed to mention that. Bring that message to the forefront so that you are letting them know that you're thinking of them and caring. Internally, you must act quickly to devise a plan to keep the culture alive. Implementing a work from home policy is only the first of many, many, many steps in this long and challenging shift. For organizations where working from home is not a possibility, you need to consider the minimal viable environment to keep your organization functioning. So this requires considering safety, legal ramifications, new investments in equipment and cleaning, but also the messaging internally to make sure that you're keeping a close eye on your local officials and communicating to your team members that you are aware and they are aware that you're staying on top of that, right? So here's some lessons that we've actually learned, which are really interesting. So the first two you see on the top left and right are lessons we've learned from work from home and lessons we've learned from people that have to continue working at the office. And then in the center, we have some lessons that really apply to everybody. Most importantly, leaders still have to be present, even if you're working from home. So this means that C-levels need to be front and center more than ever. Work with them to develop a cadence of communication so that they can provide updates on what the company is doing and if there's any new information on the impact of the crisis or benefits for, whether actual health benefits, et cetera, for those at home. The more you can provide clear, concise understanding of what is available and what is not available, the more trust you're going to be building. One really cool example, actually a school principal in Dresden, Germany, has been issuing daily updates and opening it up to the community to respond through their communications platform. So some of the posts have actually had a little humor in them and lightened the mood while so many working parents are faced with some really unexpected challenges right now, trying to balance work and family. But he's got this place for his community to respond and they feel engaged. At some organizations, department managers have actually created morning and afternoon stand-ups through their virtual environments. This gives your staff opportunities to have some face time with their colleagues and actually discuss questions with their direct managers. Some of our customers have actually created virtual water coolers and at open-ended conferences for their global teams to share pictures, videos, leave comments. This gives you a chance to feel human again versus being trapped at your home office or your bed or couch or food table, wherever you're sitting and doing your work. For comms though, pushing out news must be limited to must have. If there was a scheduled cadence you guys had up front, maybe that some information is a little less important, less timely, don't publish it. We've seen a substantial reduction there while also increasing new publications relative to the crisis, growing by, like I mentioned earlier, an additional 163%. That's top of mind. This is what people want to know about. If you're still open and you have feet on the ground, keep constant touch with your team on site. and really use your leaders to do this too. They are very fragile and likely concerned. You must have a presence, help them know that you were there for them, do everything in your power to exhaust that frame of mind. Help your team understand what 6 feet away or might actually be by boundaries. Maybe setting up some photos or signage around would be really useful. We've actually learned from one organization that they have a plan to separate out their substitutes. So essentially, if you replace someone, if your responsibility, if you are the next person in line for someone else, if they're absent or whatever, maybe keep a safer distance, come up with a flexible work schedule or something of that nature. That would be really helpful. And again, I can't reiterate for everyone, leadership must be present. And this is that opportunity that I mentioned earlier. This is the boardroom conversation you've got to be having, that these people, you are the key in order to provide this funnel of information and communication across to all of the folks that are out there. And we're seeing it, and people want to hear from their leaders. They must. This is true whether it's remote, whether you still have on-site or not. Provide a constant flow of information regarding the company's stance and what you've learned about the crisis. The last thing you want to do is leave people alone to create assumption based on theories of what next steps are. And then also consider a plan C. There's a chance that this isn't going anywhere. So what does that look like for your organization? Is this opportunity to work with your company, and is this an opportunity to work with your company and involve people in every step of the way? Yes, let people raise their hands, right? Because in times of crisis, you can see the best in people. So don't assume the responsibility of all communications on your own shoulders, right? Seek help. Delegate responsibilities. People want desperately to be involved and feel important. Give them every opportunity to stand together and talk. They really want to do that, so do so. Here's an example. Polliner in Germany. They're actually a brewery located in Munich. And in response to their over 15,000 employees, they use their employee app to request that all employees with a company device, laptop, etc., bring them home at the end of every workday in order to be ready on short notice should they enforce a work from home policy. And it actually worked out perfectly for them because they were able to accommodate on very short order through messaging the work from home policy for them. So now that we've shared our learnings from the importance of clear messaging and what information should be shared depending on the policies your organization implements, I want to take a moment to highlight the absolute importance that we've seen of simplifying and consolidating all of your crisis information into one single source. So yes, getting the message out is very important, but I think all of you, I'm assuming there's a lot of head nods that will agree that it's the questions that will kill you in the long term. The long tail of what ifs and open questions in response to your messaging can inundate you indefinitely without a response team in place. So just think about the questions that you have about your job, your kids, your home. It's pretty endless, but it is predictable. So work with legal and HR to develop a team so that you can be fast and quick in how you answer these questions. Don't be afraid to delegate here. Leverage the folks. Like I mentioned earlier, people are raising their hand. They want to do something. This is a really good opportunity to get in front of that. And again, it's important to reach employees, but the real challenge are the endless questions that come in, and they are mostly the same. Like I mentioned in the previous slide, they're kind of predictable. So this is how you can create one place to answer these questions. We're seeing incredible success with organizations that enable this. What we've done, we've seen instant results by providing a simple and single and simple source that gets right to the communications, and it isn't distracted by like buttons and whiz bangs and things of that nature, right? That's why it's a little different. So example, Viessmann, a leading international manufacturer of heating, industrial, and refrigeration systems. They have hundreds of employees actually in China. So they have state-sanctioned news in the country, so the information they're receiving is very limited. But the company has actually been able to use their own platform to share preventative measures and latest updates via push notifications. And so they've built this trust. They know that if the information is coming from corporate communications, they know that it's trusted, which has really helped quite a bit. So now let's keep going here, right? How do you build this channel? So whatever channel you have today, it's the best one you have, right? Period. Don't throw it away. Use it. We're in a crisis. Squeeze everything you can out of it. Be creative. Prior to the crisis, one of our most loved experiences was a district manager that simply shared his thoughts and ideas while visiting local plants. He just needed his iPhone and hit record. Then he pushed it out to the global team. There was nothing fancy, no production studio, yet endless authenticity and value. If there's anything we've learned from early feedback that we've gotten from our Italian and Chinese customers, it's that we need a digital channel for all employees, and we need it now. So overwhelmingly, the best channel is mobile. It's real time. It reaches everyone. I'm not saying anything profound here. However, if you're not leveraging it, this crisis may be an opportunity to reconsider. Email isn't urgent. This is probably the one notification, the information about notifications that really always gets me is that 75% of push notifications are opened within an hour of receiving them. So we're seeing these push notifications and banners and help guides to simplify how employees can actually get access to the information, and it's really quite paramount. This is an image that I really love to use, and I think it helps paint this picture of like what you're up against right now. The employee experience during a crisis is pretty, even though it's very traumatic, if you take a step back, it's easy to understand it to a certain extent, right? Because like I mentioned, the questions are fairly predictable. Where do I go? What is open? What are you expecting of me? With crisis, you can start with something pretty basic. But when the crisis does subside, you need to be ready to deliver that same delivery channel, but open it up to the fundamental information you would normally have wanted to share in the need when businesses were actually operating as usual. So what I love is I love looking at Susie and Sandra here. It's like Sandra in comms, she's thinking, okay, I have messages, I have information I need to share. That information comes from IT, that information comes from my HR, it can be coming from finance, leadership, etc. And I need to make sure that Susie has that information. And from Susie's perspective, maybe the most important thing for her is the me stuff, my payroll, my PTO, my benefits, incident reporting, professional development, how am I doing, etc. She needs that local specific content. It could be the menu for her cafeteria. It could be just knowing that the table in the kitchen has USB ports now. But she also needs access to her safety information, and she needs to know what the company is doing as well. And it kind of expands. And so I see this as like two sides of a coin. And it really helps paint a picture of, what exactly your organization needs to be sharing. And with this crisis, you see, I don't like to say opportunity, but it's like you see when the message is relevant, it really, truly captures your interest, and you can share. You become a resource that is expected, and this is where you can really see that information come to life here. If you're looking to understand what you can deliver from a post-crisis perspective, we've outlined some of what we've seen. Most notably, we've seen an average of a 75% reduction in pages when switching from a standard intranet to staff base. The good news is digital platforms today are ready to go. And this is not just a staff-based conversation. There's a lot of organizations out there that can provide this. And you might already have it in place, which is awesome. You really no longer have to think about year-long IT cycles anymore either. So what we've done that's a little different is that we've leveraged everything we've learned from our customers and templatized it in a way that you can have a tool like this in one day. So like I mentioned earlier, we've seen this work in other times of crisis. So with Tradewinds, this is one of our customers. They live in the western coast of Florida. So their world is crisis. Crisis is actually kind of their normal with all the hurricanes. They have over 1,100 folks on the west coast of Florida specifically. Beforehand, they were only able to reach about 200 folks that had an email account, whereas the remainder of the organization didn't have email. But now they use push notifications. They alert the entire workforce. And then something a little fun is during calmer times, they use push notifications for contests with prizes. So crisis is the hurricane, and the contest is the experience that they want and are looking for during the peaceful times. Same technology, two different scenarios. With respect to the crisis we're in, this is the situation really, truly, where comms is unquestionably invaluable. So here's your next step. You are at the table, more so now than ever before. In order to live up to it and really, really position yourself, you need to own the message. So don't sugarcoat, be transparent. Focus on actionable tasks for your staff. Understand your personas. You are the ambassador. You listen and you know what every employee needs, and you already know what their questions are. And to be fair, you're overworked. So don't get trapped in being responsible to answer everything. Take care of yourself, delegate, and create a place where people can find information and take yourself out of the operative communications. Create easy to find useful resources and get rid of all of the long tail that we talked about before. And you can only do this if you have the channels. So don't compromise on the channels. Now more than ever, you need to make sure you have the right channels to do your work. Demand it. This crisis shows no signs of going away. So get away of the curve and plan ahead of this. So some final thoughts to understand what motivates your management right now is understanding that what people need and want. Give them a voice. Involve your senior executives early in the process. Make sure you get their buy-in and keep them involved in this. Keep them involved in this crisis. You need their face and their voice to support their experience. Don't let them delegate. Let them be the voice. Ask questions that will go well beyond yes and no. Let people interact with folks at all levels, even if their questions are hard to answer. This helps with transparency. Be prepared to iterate as you go. It won't be perfect, especially not the first time. And don't be afraid to test the waters. Don't forget also that you're the storyteller. Making this information meaningful will help influence engagement. You've got the touch, so own it. So here are some things that I wanted to share that, from us that we see that really, really shines true. That's excellent. This is kind of what it looks like on both on mobile and desktop. You can get it, your branded application on most familiar app stores. Start getting this in one day. If you have any questions, you can go to staffbase.com/staffbase now. Please reach out to us if you have questions. I mentioned a few times throughout this session that there's you're in front of the boardroom. I'm also going to get everybody a copy of, we have a really cool deck that shows you how to bring communications to the boardroom. And I want to make sure that you guys have access to that. If you have any immediate questions that aren't able to be answered today, I try to go through this as quickly as possible because I was under the impression there's going to be a lot of questions today. Please feel free to email me directly, jason@staffbase.com. And we can talk a lot more. I wanted to get a lot more to your questions. Excellent.
Great. Thank you, Jason, for that great webinar. There are a few questions that came in. I did see some in the chat. If anyone had any questions that you'd like us to answer, please put them in the Q&A as well. It would be easier to sift through. So the first question, what do you recommend when it comes to sending regular non-COVID comms? Things like regularly occurring newsletters, previously scheduled comms for projects that kicked off before the situation started, and processes that still need to happen, like year-end reviews. Like, what is the balance when sending more comms than usual because of COVID?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So one of the slides I was talking about, there is a balance, right? Because I mean, clearly COVID is top of mind. Absolutely. I would say that you're going to have to make some tough decisions and prioritize what makes sense and what doesn't. I think that what we've seen is that we try to keep the communication flow. I guess we would say we would back off on maybe pushing out so much information. We still make it available. So maybe you publish the information somewhere, but then the actual COVID related content that gets more alert, maybe that's more front and center so that people can still have access to it if they have questions and so on and so forth.
Okay, great. Thank you. Should senior leadership maintain a business style or voice during this pandemic, or should it be more warm and heartfelt and less business voice?
Mm. I mean, I think, uh, unfortunately, the answer is going to depend on the type of organization that you work for. I'm always more inclined to and receptive to that human experience, right? I think, like as I mentioned earlier, some of the more heartwarming experiences are more effective things I've seen throughout our different customers and what we've seen are the are those moments where you see someone that just kind of takes the cloak away and just very honestly explains what's going on. And I think one of the messages earlier was about being transparent, and also it's okay that you don't have the answers. No one has the answers, right? But in order to just humanize it, I think that example that I mentioned earlier too, which was that district manager that would use their iPhone to kind of say, "Hey, I was at the plant floor and I met Charlie today. It was great. We had a really good time." Blah, blah, blah. And that has more impact than standing in front of a podium or a desk, et cetera, kind of like giving a State of the Union. It's more like, "Hey, we're all in this together. We're people, et cetera." That seems to really, really resonate. That's where you start to see people being more receptive to that. Because also the image, right? The imagery of like being more business formal sends like almost like a higher persona, like a hierarchy. It sort of like sends that message. And I think in a time of crisis, you want there to be authority, but you don't want there to feel like we're above this experience. I think that you want to be more at the ground floor with folks.
Okay, great. Thank you. How do you deal with employee morale when some positions can work from home and others can't, such as a bank where the head office staff can work from home, but frontline staff cannot?
Yeah, really, really tough, good questions about that. So there's different opportunities. So depending on what kind of technologies you have, I'll start with the virtual one first because that's a little bit easier to answer. Um, let's say you use type video conferencing tools like Zoom, for example, right? There have been organizations that actually create a recurring meeting, let's say around lunchtime, or maybe they pick a time. If it's a global organization, let's say it's 10 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern time is like a fairly reasonable time to do something globally. Not for everybody, but for enough. And then at that time, members throughout the globe can actually jump in on the video call, have a cup of coffee, he'll say hello, share some thoughts, and just feel like they're there again. That can apply also to a combination of the virtual and feet on the ground as well. You could set up maybe a video station or something of that nature. Like maybe there's a conference room where you can do that. People can just literally walk into the conference room. The meeting is open and you can have a cup of coffee and just feel human again, and feel like you're actually talking with your participants, etc. Morale is tough. It's a tough thing. I think that I think one interesting idea was to share like simple things like meditation examples and things like that, and people can jump in and talk about that they were able to do so. Some do it from home, some do it at the office, etc. I think what really matters at the end, right, is that you're trying to keep your culture alive. And it may sound like a simple idea, but it's a lot harder to accomplish than meets the eye, right? You really need to be thinking about how can I help these folks? What makes them feel good? And that's where the opportunities of like really localized experiences will probably be most beneficial. So you can work directly with like let's say those managers that know the office better than anyone. Talk to them about the people that are there. Get to know and understand. If you don't personally know them, ask if there's like, let's say there's like a couple hundred folks that are there. Are there any standout folks within that organization that are still working at the office, at the bank, et cetera, that you can kind of highlight and praise, et cetera? Give them that moment of humanity and make them feel pretty good. That's going to have a ripple effect.
Okay, thank you, Jason. There are a couple questions around the same topic, so I'll kind of mash these two together. In a crisis, leadership can get scared for the health of the business, especially in small companies. Are there any thoughts on helping leadership think of employees as well as business, and then
Mhm.
building upon that is kind of the human versus the reality, such as the compassion for need for childcare, the suggestion to look for alternative care or allow effective working from home.
Mhm.
So how do businesses kind of, the leadership think of employees as well as the business?
Absolutely. And this is where maybe when I said it in the slide deck, it sounded a little simplistic, but I think it's a little bit more of a larger topic, which is if your leaders aren't addressing in a very transparent way that they're concerned about the health of the organization, um, then you're doing the organization a disservice. So regardless of the crisis that's happening, the plan must be to keep the lights on, right? The organization needs to continue somehow. So I think addressing that right off the bat is saying, look, here's the outline of what we're seeing. This is how long we can survive if we do X. This is how long we can survive if we do Y. This is a little unpredictable. This is our plan C. Um, and this is where those opportunities saying, look, if we by law can't have more than X amount of people here at the plant or at the organization, we're going to look for some volunteers. Like, can we create some sort of rotating schedule? And that's where, like that, in time of crisis, people will volunteer to do things that they normally wouldn't do, which does have sort of a positive impact in the grand scheme of things. But I do think, most importantly, to answer that question, to be transparent, because when this does cease, the idea is to go back to the way things were. And if you're not being clear about what is necessary to plan around ensuring that that's a possibility, then you're going to be misleading your folks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Um, Regarding cadence of email push, how often we update our intranet every day and are concerned with pushing too much. Right now, our plan is to push once a week with general info in a second on COVID-19 recap.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, um, one of my colleagues calls this social governance. You really need to respect, under normal circumstances, you need to respect that push notification. Um, once you get inundated with pushes, it just becomes another ding that your phone makes, right? We all do it, right? I have an Apple Watch. I'm not wearing it right now because of the webinar, but every time every time it vibrated, I would just go, oh, I got to check, and now I don't, right? Because I'm so used to it, and that'll happen with news cycles too. So that's under normal circumstances. I think with this crisis, increasing the information you're sharing, so long as it directly relates to your team, um, and that's where the extra work needs to go into, to make sure that that message is super clear, about whether you're sending, maybe you have a distribution list, maybe you're sending it messages to, um, location one. Make sure that the information you're sharing relates to location one and not location C. Um, I would just really try to focus around that. And with that, you could absolutely increase, because people are looking, right? People in this time of crisis, they want answers about the company. And then also they want to know trusted sources to read this information. So really, I don't think it's a problem to increase the capacity, increase the volume of messaging, because the need is so present. But I do think it is wise to listen to your inner saying, okay, let's slow down a little bit too. I think if you can figure out that balance, you'll be okay. But I think in the time of crisis, sending much more information than you normally would is completely reasonable and acceptable.
Great, thank you. Um, can you recommend different platforms or programs for virtual water coolers?
Yeah. There's a ton out there, right? So I think that it depends on the type of organization you are, right? Are you an organization that has a lot of folks that are on the field, or do you have a lot of folks that are behind desks? So for virtual water coolers, we Staff Base offers one, of course. There's a lot of platforms out there that offer employee experience platforms that are out there. So there's several options. If you just typed in, mobile employee application, you're probably going to find a lot of options there. That's one end. Another end is just simply leveraging tools that your organization can still own, right? Such as these employee engagement tools that I just mentioned. But there's like things like Slack and things of that nature too that can also accommodate that. I would encourage to look at video as an option. So even if it's like a GoToWebinar, a Zoom, a WebEx, things of that nature, opportunities to see someone face to face, even if you're virtual, it will encourage a better experience. If from a technology standpoint that's not possible, I would leverage tools like Slack, et cetera. A lot of organizations that we work with were originally using things like WhatsApp. I don't encourage that, only because you're not going to be in a situation where your corporation is managing the data. So I would, if you're going to offer these water cooler tools, see what you have in place already. If there's a form of communication, if there's like anything that where threading is capable and people can see all the messages that whatever it is that you're using, take advantage of it. You have it, right? So I think that's where you're going to get the best results, because for this particular situation, that water cooler sense will have that impact. As long as you just create it in something that's already somewhat familiar and it simply can accommodate that, either the text or the video aspect, so long as the company is managing it from a safety and legal proprietary reason.
Great, thank you, Jason. There's a couple questions and some discussion going on around the trust of the information that's being sent out, right? So a number of times the
Yes.
communication channel was mentioned. Kind of how is that trusted? Is this a place where blockchain technology should be used? People talking about task force. Can you speak a little bit to the trust of the information?
Yeah, I think that, and I hope I answer this correctly, but I think part of the responsibility of comms in this time of crisis is to be that aggregator. And I used that example earlier of Max Mara and Wiesmann, and they were able to early on provide information that wasn't coming from Wiesmann or Max Mara. They were saying, look, this is from the CDC, this is from the World Health Organization, this is from, these are the, the leaders of the organization trust this data, and this information is what we wanted to share. And I think if you make it clear that you're not just only talking about your organization, but you also want to keep people informed of what the world is saying and talking about, then you should become that trusted source. I'm not sure if I'm totally answering your question correctly, but that's what I can give you that answer based off of what I've seen. If anyone wants to go deeper in that, I'd be happy to get you in front of someone else that might be able to answer that, especially if it's from a security standpoint.
Great, thank you, Jason. The next question, what can you do when your CEO doesn't want to communicate anything?
That's a great question. So I mentioned earlier that I'm going to share everyone with a deck to get yourself in front of the boardroom, but I also want to, I think that if you're in a situation where the CEO doesn't want to say be present, be in front, you have a couple of options, right? So option one is then what other leaders are communicating with that C-level and are open to sharing that message. That's one option. Another option is what other leaders in the organization can you team up with to share and encourage that C-level, the CEO, to reconsider that decision. And then the third option is probably the most impactful option, which is to get feedback from the feet on the ground. Reach out to those folks and ask them if they would like to hear from their leaders, and the answer unanimously will be yes. Demanded, actually. So I think those are the three options I would pose. None of them are easy. Probably the least amount of Uh, Politicizing would be the third option, to reach out to, try to get some sort of poll going to say, would you like to hear from your leaders? And you can bring that. Um, Easier said than done. But there's a lot of resistance from C levels that don't want to be in front, and there might be just a false understanding of there might just be a false understanding of the importance of their message. And I really think that there's an opportunity there to put yourself in front of those people and really try to be of that voice, for the people. And it's a tough job, but I think you can accomplish it. I hope you can accomplish it in most cases.
Great, thanks, Jason. And then another kind of take on this, talking about these platforms.
Yeah,
How do we, so someone has a question about bringing IT to the table as well and giving them a voice.
absolutely.
So to help enable them to achieve their objectives, do you have any recommendations for that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that whenever I would argue that IT needs to be at the forefront of a lot of your information sharing. I mean, these are the folks that have control of your intranets. They have access, and maybe they have a lot to do with. They work with the legal team in terms of safety protocols and different information that is out there that is just absolutely relevant to the organization, especially in a time of crisis. There's a lot of technology related questions that maybe aren't being considered in terms of device management. What devices are you capable of using? What devices can I use? Can I not use? Are there technical limitations that will be preventing me from having the type of access I need to my, whatever it might, maybe my file share, etc. So I, I think it's absolutely imperative to uh, build a team with your IT staff. Absolutely, their message is so important. That collaboration. If you go back to that image that I shared with Susie and Sandra, and IT is absolutely one of those pieces of the chunk.
Okay, thanks, Jason. There's a couple questions surrounding kind of the same topic. So if you have, do you have any specific COVID-19 communication guidance principles for external or customer communication? And also, at what point do you kind of reach an information overload?
Yeah. Um, I'll share after. I'll make sure that when we send out an email after this to thank everybody, that I get you some links to some really good resources. I'd be happy to do that. And I apologize. What was the second part of the question?
Sure. So at what point does it become information overload?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think that information overload is. Someone mentioned earlier about like sending a message once a week. I don't know if that's enough information. Um, Maybe every other day is a good cadence. Maybe twice a week is a good cadence. Um, Information overload in a situation where we don't really fully understand or grasp what the situation is. I think that's where it gets really um, difficult. Um, I would argue that your let's see. I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase that. Um, I think you definitely need to be cautious of what you're sharing. But again, I mentioned this already before, was that sending information on during this time of crisis is acceptable to increase. But I would say that maybe if you keep a cadence of every other day to three, maybe no more than 3 times a week, with the exception of like absolute emergency situations.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason. There's still kind of a few follow-ups on getting a seat at the table during the
Mm.
coronavirus for comms people. Could you maybe speak a little bit more as to if they haven't been consisted or considered a trusted advisor of the C-suite previously, how do they kind of get that foot in the door?
I mean, this crisis is that foot in the door. Um, I mean, if I don't know of many organizations that are, I mean, this is a situation where communications is at the forefront of. Oh, wow, Marianne, that's wonderful that your CEO does that, by the way. If anyone isn't looking at the chat, Marianne just mentioned that her CEO sends an email to the staff at the end of every day. So that's a perfect example of the type of collaboration between communications um, and and the different leaders within the organization. What kind of that is required? That type of collaboration is so critical. If you're unfortunate and you don't have someone that has that um, that is unwilling, as I mentioned before, I think there's so much data out there that shows that employee experience directly translates to churn. It directly really relates to whether or not the organization is going to be capable of hiring new employees, et cetera. We've done multiple studies and I can share these in the link too. I have to remember all the links I have to share. But the short version is that there's been a time where communications maybe doesn't get gets a little bit devalued, or there's times when you feel like, well, there isn't like a clear ROI, so it's not important. In a time of crisis, there is no greater opportunity than to share information than right now, which is why I think this is that opportunity for you all to be in front of your C levels, to be there. I think this is that moment to really show the importance of what you guys are amazing at doing. I was fortunate enough to be at IABC last year, and there wasn't a single person at the that came to our table or that I met that weren't incredible, kind, aware people. And so I think that type of human, that type of thinking is what is so crucial in a time of crisis.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Another thought here. Do you have any recommendations regarding communicating to a fully displaced workforce? Do people out of work or being laid off for an indefinite period need to hear from their employer? At what time, when the crisis ends, isn't it good to have kind of ongoing dialogue with displaced workers? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I mean, the most successful organizations that I've seen um, are thinking about their employees before they've signed the line and filed that said, I'm going to work here. But they're also coming up with a plan to map them well into retirement, so that if they're an alumnus, even if they are maybe short-term unemployed because of the situation, I think that keeping those people involved in the water coolers, keeping those people involved in communication is absolutely critical. Um, so yes, absolutely keep those people in mind, because you're going to want them back, right? Um, I think that makes complete sense.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason. Just trying to get through as many here as we possibly can. What do you think about sending out push polls to employees every day, asking them how they're doing, if they're stressed, okay, calm? Is it a good time to launch something like this and share the results with employees, or no?
I think it would be, that is something. So that's actually, that maybe that's a better way of answering a question that was asked earlier about being inundated with information. So I think we have to figure out the balance, like the critical news that is going out there that relates to the coronavirus. That's very important, especially if it relates regionally to the people that you're sharing that information to, right? So schools are closing, stores are out, there's a lockdown here at X location. That's very important. That should be shared as quickly, as close to immediately as possible. Then there's also like company related information about the virus too. There's going to be a layoff. There's going to be this. We're changing this. This is a new policy. Immediacy is completely reasonable there too. Then there's just general, like more trends, more things happening in the world. That could be much more slowed down. And then the last question is like, how are you doing? I would say that the how are you doing polls, I would say maybe every other, during this time of crisis, starting it now, sure. I think that's fine. But I would be a little, I would be a little bit If it's going to be to the entire organization, I would suggest maybe doing it once a month. Uh, However, if you can work with all of the district managers, et cetera, the people that are working with smaller pockets of teams, and you can gather the same information there on a more regular basis if they're doing like some of those virtual stand-ups, et cetera, and you can pull that same information and gather it through the district managers, then you can probably get a better temperature read. I would recommend doing it that way.
Okay, thank you. Here's a new question. Do you think that communication surrounding COVID-19 should involve stories of recovery? Does crisis communication always have to be about doom and gloom?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I think that crisis communication can be, I mean, the moments during, let's see, Hurricane Sandy, as someone who lives in the tri-state area, the moments I remember more than the terrible moments were like the heroes, the incredible people that were on the beaches that were cleaning things up, the Verizon field workers that were working without any power and doing amazing things. Like that's the encouragement. Giving praise to those like the bank tellers that are, essentially risking themselves to make sure that people can have financial stability. I mean, that's a hero if I've ever heard one. I highly recommend that person really. I highly recommend you advocate those people. Absolutely. Um, I saw one question in the chat that was talking about doing virtual stand-ups. I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier as well, and I highly recommend you do that. But I recommend you do it at more of a granular local level. I think that would be more successful. So if you can work with your different departments and see if they can do smaller groups, it'll just make for a more productive meeting. It'll allow for a little bit more time for the human interaction as well, rather than doing large, huge groups that'll feel a lot more like you're being talked at, rather than having an opportunity to do like some more good bottom up conversation.
Great, thank you, Jason. Another question, in an open communication network among employees, how do you prevent rumors from flying around?
Well, that's just why you need to absolutely control the flow of information, and you need to be in front of it. Period. Um, and that's where I know there's been a lot of questions about information overload, but in this time of crisis, there's going to be assumption overload. So that's why I really hesitate giving a good answer about um, sending too much information. Right? People need to know what. I use that NYC officials example, but like people need to know where your company stands, and the people need to understand what is expected of them going forward as an employee of the organization, and what benefits are available to these people should they get sick, if they feel ill, what should they be doing, etc. All of that.
Great, thanks, Jason. An earlier question here, if a company was late getting info out to the staff, how do they win back their confidence in a crisis situation?
Can you repeat that one more time? I'm
Yep,
sorry.
if the company is late
Hmm.
getting info out to their staff, how do they then win back the confidence in a crisis situation?
I mean, the only way, better late than never. um, I've never. I mean, look, we're all kind of experiencing this together. Being open and honest of saying, look, we've delayed. Uh, we're sorry that we did that. That was that was a poor choice on our end, but we're here now. And then being consistent and keeping to that promise, then you won't need to be worried about it. Exactly. Ellie just said there is no latent pandemic. I completely agree. And Jeff actually had a really cool comment about performing arts. There's so in addition to like these virtual water coolers, there's this opportunity to share things outside that are happening. Like I think it was in Italy, there was an opera singer that was performing his doing his performance from his balcony. There's other organizations that are doing. I think there was a comedian that tried to like replicate that, and someone yelled at him, and it was fun. There's a lot of things going on like that that you can share that just sort of humanize this experience that we're all in this together. I mean, gosh, the amount of cat memes that are going around right now with people working and having their cat on their lap or their dog next to them is overwhelming. But it's fun and people can relate to it. I think I saw one picture of like a mom or a dad and their kids were on their lap and they're trying to just like put their arms around them so they can write on the keyboard. It's like, this is what virtual conferencing is now. You share that type of information. I think that continues to humanize the experience, and that is so important.
Great, thanks, Jason. We have time for about one or two more.
Sure.
There was one question here that was asked twice. I'm just trying to find it. So it was just put in the chat
Yeah.
about challenging coordinating communications with their parent company. Do you see
Yeah.
that one about the two intranets?
Yeah. Let me just, if it's okay, just to read it real quick.
Yep.
Hmm. Oof. Yeah, that's tough. So just to kind of paraphrase for anybody that's still on the phone, they have two different intranets. They both comm teams are using emails. Teams, no, both comm teams are sending email communications, and they're trying to apply some just basic business continuity with the company. And then we've recommended to all staff to use audio calls only, and video is more taxing on bandwidth. Yeah. Understood. Do you have any recommendations to mitigate this confusion? Yeah, I mean, yeah. I guess if I had to simplify the experience, is that at the very least, given the crisis, the parent company should be meeting. They should, or at least have a meeting to discuss what type of communication is going to occur between both parties. Can there be some sort of collaboration between the two? I would say that similar to working in a global organization, if you all have if you have access to the same type of social feed, you need to make sure that you're in alignment with your different parties and different organizations, that before you should send a message out, that it's consistent with the message that they were planning on sending out. I think that you need to, even if you are completely two different companies, but you are still under that same umbrella, there needs to be some sort of collaborative effort together to join forces. And maybe you guys can actually delegate a little bit to take ownership of, one party takes ownership of this message, another party takes ownership of this message. And then when it gets sent out, it's the same message. The two intranets parts is a little bit challenging, but I think you can accomplish the same task through both email and both of your intranets, so long as you guys, really, you just need to do some meetings and just talk about what it is that you're sending out, et cetera, so that it's consistent and not confusing on that regard. And then, because I'm assuming that the question you have right now is that you're looking for some sort of technology solution. What I mentioned earlier with Staff-Based Now could probably mitigate that. But if you have the two intranets and you're doing email, I think before you even do that, what you should really do is sit down and just talk with both companies, try to set up a cadence together to make sure you guys are working on a consistent basis.
Great. Thanks so much, Jason. Just because there's so many questions, I'll just ask one more.
Yeah.
When an organization is sending updates to external customers, should the information be shared with employees first confidentially or simultaneously to external customers?
I think that the first message, the most important message, is your people. And I think that your customers are absolutely critical. Obviously, they come first. I saw a Twitter post that kind of summarizes my feelings on the latter part. Is that someone wrote, "Oh, cool! I got another email about what a company is doing regarding COVID." I think that talking about being inundated. You have to understand that from a recipient and from a customer perspective, that they've already received probably about 40 to 50 or 60, anything that they've subscribed to or have purchased from in the past, they've received some sort of message. Focus on your people. That they're the people first, companies win. That's what we say right here. Like that's where you need to be. They're your greatest assets, and that's never going to change.
Awesome. What a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Jason. And thank you to everyone for your time. I realized that went a few minutes over. There were so many questions we still couldn't get to. Please feel free to reach out to Jason directly. And there were a few questions again about the slides and the recording. We will absolutely share that on our resources page and through an email after this webinar. So thanks again so much to Jason and staff base. And I hope everyone stays safe and well.
Thank you so much.